in this case study, page 29. We're going to review a little bit of boy parts, then we'll move to menstrual cycle. All is glory. Enjoy.
It's like a never-ending boy part.
Yes. Don't pick up the whole rest of the class.
29.
20, page 29.
Are we doing any other pages from our page solution? Page 30. So that's it.
Alright, so this will be mostly review, but we'll learn anyway. So we got this old guy who has pain. They find lumps on his prostate. Is that good? Okay, and then they find an antigen. Ooh, you remember that from 112. It's on his prostate, and his is 450, and it should be 4. So what does that tell you then is going on? His prostate's getting bigger, right? It's growing more, and it's getting lumps. So what do we call that when your prostate's growing too much? Prostate cancer is one option. Or hypertrophy. Either of those are fine. His prostate is getting too big, either because it's growing or because it's cancerous. But his prostate is going through the roof, 10 times, 100 times bigger than it should be. It's growing like mad. So, number 2 is where you're supposed to be. Review for your exam coming up. How is this going to affect his abilities to pee? What does the prostate do with peeing? Let's look at naked guys. Here we go. Let's find our prostate. There it is. Underneath the bladder. And what goes through the prostate? What is that tube there? The urethra. So, if this is growing bigger, what's it going to do to the urethra? Smashes the urethra. So tell me about the old guys in nursing home. They complain they can't what? They can't pee. It dribbles. It drips. They can't turn it off. That's the concept, is you're smashing the urethra where the prostate is located, at the base of your bladder. All right, so let's go back to our case study. One more time. Urinary system. Let's see. Blocks urethra. Crushes urethra. Plugs urethra. Makes it hard to urinate. All those things. Make sense? All right, so now, reproductive abilities. You'll have fluid problems, right? Seminal fluid. Abnormalities. So you may have too much, you may have too little. You're going to have abnormal seminal fluid because the prostate excluded. What else? What do the old men complain about with their sex life that you don't want to know about? They can't get it up and they can't get it on. All right, so let's look at the prostate. So why would a prostate affect his erection? His penis is over here. That's not his penis. How would that affect erections?
Blood flow?
Blood flow. If I make my prostate get bigger, it's going to smash all the blood vessels in your pelvic floor. There's a bone here, there's a butt there, and that's going to smash between them. So it's going to destroy the blood vessels, or crush the blood vessels, or impede the blood vessels, or vasoconstrict the blood vessels. All right, so go back to our case study. Blocks blood flow. Stops blood flow. Stops. So it'll have a hard time getting hurt, right? Because you can't get the blood to the penis because the prostate's smashing everything. Right? Makes sense? Number 3 is what we're going to go from last week. I want to lower his testosterone level to treat this. So tell me about that graphic you learned.
You're going to inhibin or GnRH?
No, let's do testosterone over here. And we have the graph like this. If I want to lower his testosterone, what did I do? Lower GnRH.
LH.
Lower LH. To do that. So a drug to lower testosterone would have to stop his LH and or stop his GnRH. I want to lower his testosterone levels in his body because testosterone makes you grow a prostate. Makes sense?
Makes you grow prostate and testes?
Yes. Well, no, testes produce testosterone. Testosterone produces prostate. Well, last week with the baby, right? It takes the testosterone to turn on the male plumbing. That's the prostate is responsive to that. Make sense? So you'd have to turn off one of those or both. All right. So, number 4. So we're going to say we're going to castrate him. Good God. All right. Let's figure out what castration is. If you're not on a farm, you may not know. If you castrate something, you do what? You cut his balls off, right? You move the testes. What do testes make? That would reduce testosterone. If I remove your testes, I would lower testosterone. Because the testes make testosterone. Right? So the most standard treatment that most men don't go for, if you castrate him, there's no testosterone, his prostate doesn't grow anymore. All right? But that's not a winner because, so get number 5. What's going to happen to his sex drive? You cut off his testes. There you go, right? So he has no sex drive anymore. On the farm, you make a steer by castrating a male because he won't be bothering the cows any. He'll grow like a male, but he won't have a sex drive to bother him or will be aggressive. Right? So every farmer does this trick so you don't get an aggressive male. Makes sense? So if you're working at the nursing home, you can either be castrated, which will be a no-go, or they can give him drugs to try blocking his hypothalamic axis to lower his testosterone. Make sense? All right. That's a basic review. We're going to spend the rest of our time today on the next page. Okay? So before we do this case study, you have to understand how the female cycle works, which is what my job is for the rest of the day. Okay, so pure your mind, body, and soul. For this. You learned this in 112. You did.
Can we not learn it again?
Alright. So we're going to learn some vocabulary. Okay. So here we have, okay, that double O means an egg, or oocyte is literally, say both O's. So oogonium, oocyte, they mean egg gland. Right? So if you remember 112, women make their eggs before birth, and you go through that normal thing called meiosis to make your eggs, right? So before birth, you're making some kind of egg, primary oocyte. And then if you remember biology 112, you hit puberty, the process keeps going, and then you keep making eggs, and then it stops when? When you stop making your eggs? Menopause. So you start your eggs before birth, which you learned. You start them up again at puberty, and you turn them off at menopause. Your body's basically cranking out these OO words. Right? So oocyte, yes.
I thought that all eggs were made before birth, but only some mature. Is that
correct? So depending on how you say make eggs, you formally don't make no eggs before puberty because none of them are ovulated. However, you make all the precursors for eggs before birth. So you can argue you make them all beforehand when they mature, or they don't make any until they pop out. So depending on what I argue, you can say yes or no you want. But the concept is you start in birth, you finish at puberty.
And then menopause is what?
You turn them off. You stop releasing eggs. Okay. Like menopause, yes.
So if you make eggs while in utero,
yes.
do preemies have fewer eggs?
No, they're actually made well before. They're made as soon as you get an ovary.
Oh, okay.
So they would be, depending on how preemie you are, yeah, you have the full number.
Okay.
Worthless trivia. This is actually, if you think about this morally, ethically, it's just fun. You can take ovaries from aborted babies, take the eggs out of them, and plant them in somebody else because they're fully formed. So your mother was aborted. Think about that one for an hour. Yes. Think through that one for an hour. Yes.
So technically, the mother,
Yes.
her nutrients and whatever she's consuming is directly affecting her grandchildren.
Yes. That's called the triple effect. So whatever you're doing in your body now is affecting the 2 generations of eggs from now. Because your baby daughter has her eggs already in her. Right? So mom screws up, granddaughter's also paying the price. Because you already have them, right? Think through that one for a while too. All right, but anyway, moving on.
That's depressing.
Yes. You pay for your party. Okay. So the concept is that you're forming these eggs. So what I'm going to do is shift to this side over here. So here, find the egg for me. Where's the egg in this picture?
In the middle of that circle.
This thing. That's the oocyte, OO something. The thing around it, that's the important word. That's a follicle. Right? so the egg is the oocyte. The follicle are the things around the egg. Why would you want something around an egg? Protect, feed, clothe, all that kind of stuff. So here's my egg in the center. Here's these other cells, supportive cells, follicular cells. So in your mind now, you have to keep track of two things. Keep track of the egg and the cells around it because they change their jobs. So on this picture, I have a follicle around an oocyte. Still with me?
Yeah.
What's happening to the size of my egg here? What happens to the size of my follicle? They're growing. So as I'm developing these eggs, I'm growing the oocyte and I'm growing the follicle, the cells around it. Okay? Here's the picture to grapple with. Is the one way down here. Can someone look at that picture and tell me what happened between here and here? Ovulation. Okay, what happened in ovulation from last week? Release an egg. So the oocyte is this. That's the oocyte. What's this? That's the follicle. So when you ovulate, the egg leaves the follicle. So the oocyte is ejected, ovulation. The follicle, though, stays behind. Okay? So in this case, I've left the egg, and the follicle stays behind. So this is silly anatomy that works. Go find a bird's nest in a tree, right? The nest is the follicle. The eggs are inside of it. The baby birds hatch. They leave the nest, but the nest is still in the tree, right? That's the concept here. Your eggs are leaving the nest, but the nest stays behind.
What's the next?
Follicle in this analogy.
Right.
Sure. So if we go up to this whole top here, here's my egg in the nest. Egg in the nest. Bigger egg in a bigger nest. Bigger egg, bigger nest. Really big egg, big nest. Egg left the nest. And we call that ovulation.
So where's the ovary?
We're getting it. Don't get this egg nest, egg follicle concept.
So it's one egg and one follicle.
One egg and one follicle. So now I'm going to put it together like this.
Is it always one egg and one follicle?
Yes. So, you asked what the ovary was. Say hello to your ovary. What does your ovary do? It makes what? It makes eggs and ovulate. So, this is over time. So, we're going to start right here. Okay. So, this is saying primordial follicle. Primordial seed. When was the primordial seed?
Long time ago.
Before. A long time ago. Right? So, these are like immature baby follicles carrying an oocyte in the center. So immature eggs, immature follicles. Then we have a primary follicle and a secondary follicle. And we think that thing in the center of the follicle would be is the oocyte. So we have the oocyte is growing and the follicle is growing with it. Can anyone find an oocyte in here? There it is. Inside my big follicle. Hey, look at that. Big follicle with a big egg. Right? Oh, what happened? Ovulation. So, the egg leaves the follicle behind in your ovary and starts floating down the fallopian tube. Right here, not the scale. So, my ovary, yeah, not really that big. Right? So, my ovary is growing eggs and growing follicles until the egg then leaves the follicle behind. You've ovulated when the egg leaves the follicle. Yes?
When ovulation occurs, doesn't the egg like get basically shot up?
Yes.
Okay. How fast is that?
I don't know how to number. I've seen videos of them where it's just kind of all that fast. Yeah, what happens is actually the follicle, this is called the entrance follicle, it actually bursts. Imagine a water balloon bursting. That's how fast the fluid comes out. So whatever, I don't know about number, but that's how fast the egg basically gets shot out in the abdomen. And just by sheer luck, it gets sucked in the right tube.
Well, the fimbriae also have.
Yeah, fimbriae and all that. This kind of
So then you recycle the follicle?
let's
or you
figure it out. Let's move to the next. So, everyone with me so far, ovulated. Okay. The follicle stays behind, right? It's part of your ovary. So look at this. The follicle is here with no egg in it, post-ovulatory. And then the follicle then shrinks because I grew with the egg's gone, I'm going to shrink back down. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Those have words. Notice the words up at the top that thou will remember eventually.
Right on the board.
Corpus luteum. So let's figure out some wording here.
So this is the
Uh-huh.
Can we do a different one? Non-squeaky
Orange.
one? Squeak, I just want to build this one.
You don't like the squeak of my attack. The princess who slept on the pea. Alright, so here's some words. The follicle, remember, is these cells in the ovary. So this is your ovary.
Wait, is there supposed to be a tumor?
Yeah, well, no, diuresis, you say both O's. Right? So, follicle contains an oocyte. So that's the cells around the egg. The second word we're going to learn is corpus luteum. Literally yellow body. That's this. Describe that to me. Follicle without an egg. Oocyte. When did that occur? When does the follicle lose its egg? After ovulation. When does a follicle have an egg? Before ovulation. So the language change is not the thing. The language change. If you are before ovulation, you're the follicle. You contain an egg. After ovulation, the egg is gone. We call you the corpus luteum. Same thing. Different place. Oh wait, there's more. There's also a corpus albicans. Alba, right? White. Right? This is a decaying follicle. Or a decayed corpus luteum, if you want to say that. Because when is the corpus albicans decaying? It's going to be after ovulation, right? So I'm a follicle while I'm growing eggs. Become a corpus luteum when the egg leaves. And then when I die off, I change into corpus albicans. I'm an old follicle with no egg in me. Make sense in the language?
So they're not recycled, obviously?
No. If worth a shivia, you can see those on your ovary and count how many times you ovulated by counting the corpus albicans.
So you have like dozens.
They just stay there as a scar. Yeah. When we get to the lab next week, I can show you the scars on the screen. Yeah, you can count those and see how many times you made an egg.
That's a sack.
Interesting trivia, right? But anyway, so we go through this picture. One more time. Baby eggs and baby follicles over here. Growing an egg in a follicle. Why is it a follicle? It contains an egg. That's the language we use. Big, 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 big. At some point, the egg leaves town, ovulation. So leftovers stay behind. We call that now a corpus luteum. It's still big, but there's no egg inside of it. And that decays, digresses, whatever word you want to use. And I call the old thing corpus albicans.
So it's an egg after those.
It's a corpus albicans after the egg is leaving. Yes, left.
An egg, there's an egg in the whole thing.
So
So the egg is the follicle.
So you never put an egg in all those cells.
The same.
Okay.
Formally, there's a difference between these classifications. An egg is only after fertilization, formally.
Okay.
Yes.
So it says the corpus albicans
Yeah.
is a decayed,
Corpus luteum.
but not, but you said a follicle would only be if there's an egg in it.
Right. So you can argue it's a decaying of these, which is true, but only after the egg is left. This is a cycle, right? You're going to go from here all the way around and start back with a new one here. Each one. Make sense in this language? Because now I'm going to make it much, much more difficult, I guess. Because we're going to do it linearly here. So this is a picture showing what I just taught you. Doing it linearly. So here we have a yellow thing which represents the white thing.
Oocyte.
That's the oocyte, egg, whatever word you want to use. The pink here represents the follicle, because that's around my egg. Alright? Tell me what's happening in this picture here. Ovulation. The egg is leaving the nest. The egg is leaving the follicle. Ovulation's occurred. Then we have corpus luteum, because it's the leftover material still in the ovary. And then it begins to break down, so it regresses into a corpus albicans. Make sense? Okay, so now what we're going to do now is figure out how the body knows what to do. So this requires 2 full boards, and you're going to draw a line down the middle of your notes, because you're going to have a before and an after every time. So get 2 pages empty in your notes. Yep, 2 pages. Side by side is the best plan. Because we're going to make a big long list on each side. All right, this side of the board will be before ovulation. What's going to be over on this side, say ye? After ovulation. So ovulation is the line in the sand. There's either before or after ovulation. These are the only 2 options you have. All right?
Nothing happens during?
Yes, but that's now we're going to put that in there. But for now, we're going to start before now. There's a big during. Okay, so let's look at again what we're doing. So in the before ovulation side, because we're talking about follicle, what phase is that on the screen?
Follicular.
The follicular phase. So the shortcut way to say before ovulation is the follicular phase. Why would they say follicular phase? Because follicles are before you ovulate. They have eggs inside of them. Take a guess what I'm going to write over on this side. Say luteal phase from the corpus luteum. The yellow phase. So on a test, you can say luteal and follicle. Exactly what you do. That is a test question. Okay. So you can divide it between follicular and luteal phases, before and after ovulation. And ovulation is always the middle of the 2. Make sense? Okay. Let's figure out what's going on in my follicular phase. Describe to me what's going on in my ovary in the follicular phase.
Follicles developing.
Follicles are developing. So in my follicular phase, we're going to list some things. We're going to list what's happening in my ovaries. What do ovaries do? They make what? Eggs. Okay. The oocyte matures. So I'm growing eggs in the follicular phase. What's my follicle doing in my ovary during the follicular phase? It's maturing as well. So my follicle grows, matures, elongates, activates. Yes?
How does the body know to just mature one single egg at a time? Doesn't always.
Right. The general answer is it's a race. Whoever wins first gets to go. Your ovaries are basically fighting it out. Which ovary gets, it's about this stage, right about here. Whoever gets there first wins, and everyone else turns off and goes home. The next month we'll race again.
And it only comes from one side.
Normally it alternates, but it doesn't have to.
If twins, is one coming from each side?
Fraternal twins are 2 different eggs. It could be the same size, 2 eggs at the same time.
So is that kind of why women have better babies earlier on? Is that those eggs are the first one? I don't know.
Better means like my kids, they're all better.
Women who are younger.
I mean like Down syndrome and that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, the older your ovaries, the older the eggs have been sitting there. Your eggs are actually 9 months older than you. You do the math, right? So if you're a 45-year-old woman, your eggs are 46 years old, waiting to ovulate. The more times they stall, the more likely they will not complete correctly. That's why birth defects go up as the age of the mother goes up.
Did you hear about the case recently where a woman had twins and it was 2 different fathers?
You can do that.
What? Okay.
You have to double ovulate and have 2 different men on the same day.
Ooh.
Within 2 days you do it. Ori Povich, who's the daddy, right? Let's go back to this. So I'm growing eggs. I'm growing follicles. In the luteal phase, what are my ovaries doing in the luteal phase? In my ovaries, I'm making a corpus luteum.
Are you making them or are you housing them?
Depending on how you want to argue it, you actually have to make it convert a follicle to a corpus luteum. So you have to convert it. But I'm forming, making, dedicating, whatever word you want. I'm making corpus luteum. Right? So before ovulation, I'm growing my follicles and eggs, and after ovulation, I'm making a corpus luteum. It's the luteal phase. What do I do with my eggs?
Get ready
Why am I doing nothing? I thought this was an ovary. Do I make eggs in an ovary?
You're gonna keep doing it.
I already left it, right? The egg's left. So the ovary no longer has an egg because I ovulated. So I can't make an egg because there's no egg to make. So all I'm going to do is do my Luteum until I do the next round and start over. You only have the eggs in the follicular side in the ovary. And then they ovulate now down here. They're not in my ovary anymore, right? They're gone.
Where do they live the rest? Like until then?
Who lives where? Who lives where?
The eggs.
They're in the ovary, but only one follicle is doing this at a time.
So the eggs are technically still, you still have eggs.
Right, just not in that follicle that started here. So far so good? Okay, so now we got to figure out how your ovary knows to do this. So notice over here, we have a graph of hormones. Yay! So let's review where those hormones come from. LH and FSH are made in my pituitary. So my ovaries are doing their job because the anterior pituitary is telling them to do something.
Does that say due to?
Due to, yeah, that's due to. So let's review our hormones. What are the hormones in the anterior pituitary? On the screen in letters. LH and FSH. So you have increased FSH and increased LH during the follicular phase. So my pituitary is screaming for eggs, follicle stimulating. It wants eggs, so it's yelling. That tells the ovaries to grow eggs. Now, what organ would tell my pituitary to do that? The hypothalamus. So we're going to have the hypothalamus on here. So the hypothalamus is going to tell my pituitary to tell my ovaries what to do. What hormone from last week does my hypothalamus use to tell my GnRH? So GnRH will be going up during this phase. So my hypothalamus says, I want an egg. Mr. Pituitary, give me eggs. Pituitary says, I'll get you eggs. I yell at the ovary is supposed to grow an egg. Right? Make sense? Yes?
So it only tells one ovary at a time, or they're both?
Both ovaries get the same signal, just one faster than the other one.
And then when one releases it?
The other one stops. The next month, in theory, that would be further along, so it would go.
So is that literally each side is on a 60-day cycle?
Well, if you double, yeah, more or less. So if I had looked at this graph, and I were trying to graph it over this cycle, let's see what happens. What do you think LH and FSH will do over the course of the follicular phase? Let's see if it's true. Are they going up? Are they going up? Indeed. Notice they get really, really high right here. Hey, that line is right in the middle. What's that line represent? Ovulation. So my brain is yelling for eggs. The letters, these hormones keep increasing. But eventually they get so high that it tells the ovaries time to do what? Time to ovulate. So we call that the spike. So we'll just add that over here. Like this. So if they get so high we call it a spike, what does your ovary do?
Spits out the egg.
That's called spitting out the egg, which is called ovulation. That's how your ovary knows to ovulate, is the brain tells it to, by yelling with FSH and LH. So my brain says I want eggs, the pituitary tries to make eggs, and they grow eggs, and when they get enough of these hormones, that tells my ovary. So if I draw down these two here, that I'm seeing the brain, well, pituitary, correctly, telling my ovary how many eggs to grow and when to release them. Okay. Make sense? Okay. That's in the follicular phase. So now, in the luteal phase, let's find out what happens. What do you see happening in the luteal phase? What happened to my LH and FSH? They're going down. All right. So my LH and FSH are going down in the luteal phase. Why would they need to go down?
So you can stop ovulating.
That's right. I don't want more egg. I already released the egg, right? The egg's gone. So I'm just going to start turning off my LH. What would the GnRH be doing to turn off LH and FSH? It also goes down, right? So my brain says, I don't want an egg. Thank you very much. I have one. The pituitary says, no more eggs, please. The ovary doesn't have an egg anyway. So it turns it into a corpus luteum. Right? Does that make sense? So I'm making egg here, and I'm not making egg there. So far, so good. All right. So if you look at this little graph, we have one more piece of information. Back in 231, what happened to make graphs go way, way up real fast? What kind of homeostasis makes graphs go up? That's positive feedback. So in the few times in your life, you can say that. But the follicular phase is a positive feedback cycle. Prove that to me. Why is this positive feedback? What defines positive feedback? You increase the change, right? The change is I'm growing an egg. I'm doing something to make more eggs, more growth. With negative feedback, I would stop making eggs, right? So my brain wants positive feedback in the follicular phase to make more egg and have the egg burst out. Go over this side. Why don't I want any more eggs over here? Well, I already have one. And what kind of feedback is that? This is negative feedback. The luteal phase, you're trying to turn off making eggs. So as a male, I find this fascinating. Your brain goes from positive feedback to negative in 24 hours. Just by flipping that ovulation, your brain changes how it interprets the hormones. Yes?
So when you say you're making more eggs with the FSH and LH, do you mean it's just growing like the one egg bigger? Or is
Yes.
it, so it's
Well,
just
all the eggs in your ovaries, so we go back a page, all the eggs will be growing.
okay.
And just the one that's the biggest thing gets to finish the process. But all of them would hear the same hormones.
Okay. And then they would shrink back down.
No, they'd stay where they are, and then next month, whoever's ahead will. I'll show you an animation of it. It does make some sense.
What about in women who don't ovulate regularly or have messed up cycles?
Like in PCOS, that's usually a brain problem. Your brain can't figure out how to regulate the phase. And so you go too long or too short. And the most normally is the luteal phase that's corrupted. That's the way they say it. So if you have excess luteal phase, your cycles get really, really long. Like a PCOS.
Not like you have like a 2-month cycle or 2-week cycle, or like you're not having cycles.
That's your brain.
That's fine.
Your brain decides if you have a cycle at all. That's why women who have low body fat don't menstruate. The brain just turns them all off because you're not going to survive giving birth. So the brain says forget it. So your brain controls your menstrual cycle. So if it's off, the brain is the one that's misinterpreting, or somebody's telling the brain not to go. It's always the brain. That's not normal. Okay, we have another graph. This graph. Estrogen and progesterone, where are those made?
Ovaries.
In the ovaries. So we're going back up to our ovaries. So during the follicular phase, what do you notice about the estrogen levels? They're climbing. So my pituitary hypothalamus are making FSH and LH. That's telling my oocytes to grow, follicles to grow. And then I'm going to add one more little piece of information. As the follicles grow, that increases the estrogen in the system. The follicles making the estrogen. So as the follicles get bigger, estrogen should do what? And they do. Look at that. Estrogen is climbing as I'm growing a follicle. What do you guys about the peak in estrogen? When is that?
Right before it.
Because that's my biggest follicle. I'm going to have the most estrogen just before ovulation. Because my follicle's growing the most before ovulation. Makes sense? So my brain is saying, give me eggs and follicles. The follicle's saying, yes, I will. And by the way, I'll also grow you some estrogen as a hormone while I'm doing this. Because estrogen's made in my follicles. So far, so good? Okay. So I want you then to look after ovulation. You have a big green graph. What hormone is that? Progesterone. It's biggest after ovulation. Where do you think progesterone is made?
Ovary.
Ovary? What part of the ovary? Corpus luteum, because the follicle is what you call it beforehand. The corpus luteum makes progesterone after. So remember, we changed the name because it does something different. So after ovulation, the corpus luteum is making progesterone, the old follicle. So you have a follicle before ovulation, that's why you get estrogen up. You have a corpus luteum after ovulation, that's why you get a progesterone up. Right?
Doesn't that increase the lining?
Yes, which we'll get to next. So, take a look at my corpus albicans. That's a dead follicle, right? What should happen to progesterone and estrogen if I kill the thing off? Do they both go down? Yeah. They do. Because when that decays, there's nothing to make either one. So estrogen and progesterone drop. And then next month, your brain says, let's try this again. So I'm growing a follicle. That's going to make estrogen climb. Estrogen climbs until ovulation. The progesterone climbs because of the corpus luteum. This thing dies off. Both drop like a rock. And then next month, you do it again. Okay, so the estrogen and progesterone are the effects of the follicle growing or becoming corpus luteum.
Uterine activity equals your menstrual period on this graph.
No, uterine activity are not yet. I'll get down a little more graph. These are the ones that will affect your uterus, but not directly uterine activity.
Oh, this is graphing uterine activity?
No, this is graphing hormones of the uterus.
What are they talking about uterine activity?
I don't know what happens there. It's going to affect your uterus. That's true, but that's not what the graph is.
So is theoretically, if you're, I know everyone's cycle varies a little bit, but so ovulation would be around day 14. Is that right? And
Only
then,
if there's no artificial life. Yes.
And then the peak of progesterone then is around day 21. So,
Got that.
and then it immediately after that starts to fall off because the
Yes.
corpus luteum is decaying.
Yes. So your corpus luteum will last only 2 weeks total. So after 2 weeks, they'll go to 0 and you start over. Yes.
What else? So estrogen is like the main one
Yes.
for female. What does progesterone do? Anything else in the body?
Yes. Hold that thought. We'll get there. There's a lot.
So estrogen starts dropping as soon as you ovulate. Progesterone starts dropping a little bit after you ovulate.
No, like 2 weeks later. At the end.
Okay.
Yes. So I look at these two. Estrogen starts to drop after ovulation. Progesterone peaks about a week later and then drops at the end.
Okay.
Then the luteal phase.
So it makes the corpus luteum due to a drop in ovulation.
Right. So these go down. That makes this happen, which makes that go up.
This is backwards over there.
Yes.
Estrogen has another peak.
It does because corpus luteum also can produce some estrogen on its own because it is follicular activity. So you get a spike here that's not as high as over here.
Do the estrogen and progesterone provide negative feedback to the GnRH?
They do. We'll get there. Hold on. We'll get there.
Oh, this is too much.
All right. So now wait. There's one more down here. Last graph of the day for now. What's that? Well, I know that's menstruation. Good. But what is this whole thing here?
Uterine lining.
It says endometrium. That's a uterus. So we're going to put a uterus on your pages. Let's do uterus blues. So I want you to look at this lining here. This is your uterine lining. Endometrium is what you learned in lab. Notice this on this picture because it says estrogen is zero. So I want you to look at the uterine lining here and the estrogen curve there. Do you see anything that looks the same?
They are the same.
They are the same, right? As the estrogen level climbs, you get the growth of your uterus. So what's the job of estrogen? Thicken your uterus. So over here, we're going to put my uterus, your endometrium. What's it doing? It's getting thicker, thickening, growing thicker. Pick a word you like. Hypertrophy, whatever word. Because the estrogen is what tells it to do that. So the estrogen from your follicles telling the uterus to get thicker. Why would you want a thicker uterus, you placental mammals, you?
In case you want to grow a baby.
Babies live in there. So I want a big, thick uterus so I can live inside of you. So before you ovulate, You're going to make the home for baby by growing your uterus thicker and thicker and thicker due to estrogen effect on the endometrial lining. So far, so good? Okay. So estrogen makes your uterus grow. Take a look at this graph and tell me what progesterone does to your uterus. It does make it grow a little more, so not as much.
It kind of kills it.
What are these?
Blood vessels.
Blood vessels.
Oh, okay, so you
You're getting more, right? Ah! Let's add some stuff over here. So progesterone's job to your uterus is to maintain the thickness of the uterus. Let's ask ourselves a question. Why would you want your uterus to stay thick?
In case I have a baby.
In case you have a baby, right? I want to live here. So I want you to grow me a home and keep it. Because you're a placental mammal. What's with the blood flow? You're going to increase blood flow. What's it for? Nutrients for whom?
Baby.
For the baby. Remember, they suck you dry. So after ovulation, I'm going to keep your uterus thick. We're going to make it more and more vascularized, more and more, quote, bloody to feed the baby.
Why? I don't get why birth control would work. And like, when you take the progesterone pills, would that just make your uterus more accepting?
No, because it turns off your uterus for the next round.
So you just don't ovulate when you take
That's
it?
right. Because to your body, you're here. Therefore, you're always there. So the brain thinks you already ovulated, so there's no point making more. I'll show you an animation of that. But birth control basically fakes pregnancy. Your brain thinks there's already an egg, so there's no point making more. So you don't make more.
Is the progesterone also increasing the blood flow?
Yes. Both those are progesterone. Yeah. So we call this your pregnant hormone. It makes your uterus think you're pregnant by staying there and being bloody. We also call it the quieter hormone. It calms your uterus.
Oh, please.
That's where they use. So,
supposed to help with anxiety.
what happens to your corpus luteum after a while? Let's review. What does it do? It dies. What does estrogen and progesterone do? They go away. So what does this beautiful, thick, bloody uterus do? It goes away. So hence you bleed out everything you did the last month because you don't want to be thick and bloody anymore because you weren't pregnant. So all the thick, bloody leaves the menstruation. Then your brain decides to go over here and try it again. So the brain says, I want an egg this time. Maybe you'll get pregnant this time. And you run it through.
You're disappointed mother.
Yes, I guess so. Your brain's got to tickle a little bit. So we put this all together. So your book has one. You want to take a picture of this with your phone at some point in your college career. Because this is on your exam next week. Right?
Where is this? Is this on your tape?
Yes. It's actually a general biology 101 book. So if you can track your mind through all these rows and explain what's going on, that would be good. So I'll give you a chance to take a picture. I'll walk through it.
So the corpus luteum becomes the corpus albicans,
Yes.
and then the estrogen and progesterone are like, I'm done.
Yes.
Okay.
I need another minute here.
You guys get right up to the right up there.
I'm in. So I embrace the phone. Give me the phone.
It's like the paparazzi over here.
I know. I feel like someone important.
Photobomb the menstrual cycle.
Lady Gaga like this. Okay.
No.
Light off.
Yes.
Can you turn the light off again?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris, will you send that to me?
Yes.
Yes.
There are two things that they put up in order to get a place.
Yes.
So that you get a medicine. And I was like,
I'll go with Rudy. Rudy. Rudy when they think they're setting. That's normal. Daily. Because what they do is normally spring gets set and then hatch for late spring or summer. So when the weather changes, they think they're at 78. It's essential. So even if they don't have an egg or it's just more food, they'll still set for 10. They'll get really warm on their chest. That's their brain thinking, I need to make babies. So they're still eggs. You can take away rooster eggs. That's just feeling.
No, still gonna eat chicken.
You can still give up after that. Right. So she doesn't know about this. So you can change her to daily. So if you cover the windows, so she'll stop.
Christie, are you going to talk about meiosis for females? Are you going to talk about female meiosis?
Come on.
Oh my god.
We'll get there. Okay, let's add a little more detail. Let's review that last little bit here. Alright, so if.
So what side of our truck does it go on?
It kind of goes nowhere in particular. So if there's no pregnancy, if you did not conceive.
Are we writing this on the after side?
No, you're writing it down. It's not over here. Then you'll freak out where it goes. There's going to be two options here. If you're not pregnant, you form a corpus albicans.
So wouldn't that be the after ovulation?
Well, that would be over after this one. And then what happens to estrogen and progesterone is you have a corpus albicans. So you're going to lower your estrogen and progesterone both go down. So if you're not pregnant, those two hormones go down, which is what you're seeing here. What happens to your menstrual line? Your endometrial lining? You flush the endometrium out. We call that menstruation. So menstruation, depending on where you learned it, I learned it at the end. So when you haven't conceived and you finished your luteal phase, you menstruate. Saladin and others of his ilk put it in the front. So they say menstruation is the first part. I philosophically disagree, but I'm not the PhD guy. So I don't care where you put menstruation. Menstruation means you went all the way through the luteal phase and you made a corpus albicans and you flush everything out. So some people say menstruation is day 1. Some people say menstruation is day 28. I don't care which day you put it on, it's just on the end. Yes?
Well, then, if you take progesterone and it puts you in the constant, whatever that means,
Yeah.
why do you start a period if your body wants to pregnant?
Well, you wouldn't unless you took the sugar pills. If you take the sugar pills, you'll have a period. If you don't take sugar pills and you ram them up, you won't have a period.
There's progesterone only pills that you just take constantly.
Right. Not as a rule. One of them has to be a placebo. All you do is take progesterone, you will not menstruate.
That's not a thing. They always give you sugar pills with pills.
And with the IUD, which is progesterone only.
No, there's non-hormonal IUDs.
Right.
Yeah, but there's also hormonal, but the progesterone only IUD.
Right. But there's no sugar because it's always progesterone all the time. Right. Yes.
What about when it was like endometriosis?
We'll get there. That's a case study. Well, let me do the other option before we digress. Over here.
So does progesterone decrease?
Yes.
No. If not
They
pregnant.
both go down.
If not pregnant.
They both go down.
Now we're going to make you pregnant. Real fast. What do you think happens to your luteal phase? Keeps going. So if you're pregnant, you stay in luteal phase. So you never stop being in the luteal phase. So what that means is your progesterone levels stay going. What's the job of progesterone again? Maintain and keep body. So that's why you don't have a period when you're pregnant. Your brain, basically, and your ovaries are telling your uterus to stay there because you stay constantly in the luteal phase.
Does estrogen stay up or
Estrogen also stays up, indirectly, but the main one is progesterone.
It just stays up, it doesn't go up.
Yes. Well, we'll go up eventually.
Those were fake, oh, never mind.
So hence the idea of birth control pills. When I give you progesterone, your body thinks you're in luteal phase all the time because you're, quote, pregnant. And what you do when you're pregnant, you shouldn't menstruate, and you also, negative feedback, don't make any more eggs. That's how the concept works. Right? You're staying in this phase all the time. Yes.
So it's like you go on a labor prevention because like something happens in your brain or oops.
Kind of. Labor, so the baby actually drives labor, not your brain. The baby overrides the brain's kind of inhibition of labor that kicks in. If I predict labor, I would be doing a different job. Right? So labor is driven by what they call the uterine fetal axis. Your brain has no say. Right? The brain just obeys the concept. So let me show you another way of looking at this. Give me a second here to boot up the screen. There's a little animation of these two processes. So, PBS actually did a show on birth control pills, right? But they also did really good animation on the menstrual cycle, which is what a birth control pill basically manipulates. Right? So let me show you. Where are my lights? Okay. Alright, so here we are in my early phase, whatever they want to call it. So again, the days really don't matter because we number them all in different ways. So it's important to understand it's early, before or after ovulation. So here's your brain screaming at her ovaries because LH and FSH are going to start fighting. And my ovaries will then say, okay, I'm going to grow an egg. And when I do that, I'm going to raise estrogen levels because my follicle is growing as well. So brain yells to ovaries, and you yell at uterus. Right? So now, one dominant follicle will complete development, is what they're saying. So here's my follicles. One's going to get big enough to finish the sequence. There it goes. And now I'm going to start cranking out estrogen by the ton as this follicle grows up. Quote, grows up. Right? Right? And then that's going to thicken my endometrium. My uterus now is getting thicker because it anticipates you're going to ovulate and conceive. So I'm going to grow my uterus ahead of time. Right? So as I get closer and closer to ovulation, my brain's going to start shifting gears from positive to negative. We're going to go that next. So now my estrogens are climbing up, my LH and FSH have surged. What do all those spikes tell my ovaries to do? That's how my brain tells me to ovulate, is it just yells at my ovaries at the top of its lungs hormonally and says, kick that egg out of there. So now I've ovulated an egg out of my follicle due to the spiking of LH, FSH, and estrogen. Hey, look at that, my cervix is opening. Why would my cervix need to be open? So the sperm in. So you open cervix in ovulation because the sperm have to find that egg after you ovulate it. Right? So now I've done my follicular phase. I've made an egg. I've made my uterus get thicker because my brain says positive feedback. I want all this now. Okay? Now we're going to shift to the negative feedback into town. Right? So now I'm making a corpus luteum. It's the same old follicle, just now it changes names. And the main one that makes is progesterone, the predominant one, second half of the cycle. I love the way they phrase this. Makes the thickened endometrium favorable for implantation. How do I make it favorable? I keep it there and give it lots and lots of blood, because that's going to feed your placental mammal. Right? And then notice this little paragraph. Right? Progesterone signals the hypothalamus pituitary gland to suppress LH and FSH. Why do I want to suppress them?
You don't want to be in the focus stage.
I don't want more eggs. I have an egg. Right? I may have a baby. I don't want another egg till that one finishes. So I'm in a negative feedback concept. I'm going to turn off my brain with this progesterone. So no more follicles grow up until that goes away. Birth control is that paragraph. Right? If there's no fertilization by sperm, right? Corpus luteum dies, progesterone stops. Right? So if fertilization has occurred, then we keep taking progesterone. So that's the choice. So we're going to assume you're not pregnant right now, right? That's, as those levels go down, the uterus breaks apart because there's no progesterone to help it, and that's going to be released at menstruation. So this blinky thing here, it's got an odd little flushing concept there, right? That's menstruation. So menstruation means I lost my progesterone because of the corpus albicans, I flushed the system, now my brain's going to start over again and go right back to day one and try it again. No baby, let's do this one more time. And so every month, essentially, your brain turns on an egg, you ovulate, you wait for pregnancy, 2 weeks later you flush, restart. That's it. Every month. That's the concept. So brain is going from I want an egg to I don't want an egg. Back and forth. Okay. Makes sense? The key thing is you always ovulate roughly halfway between your menstrual periods. So for some reason people believe they menstruate when they ovulate. No. Menstruation is because you've ovulated and then there's no pregnancy. So the luteal phase is usually 2 weeks long, give or take. For most women, luteal phase is 2 times 7. It can be different, it can be too long, it can be 13, but usually it's about 2 weeks long. Because that's how long it takes the corpus luteum to die, and that's when you're going to menstruate later. Yes.
So if someone's trying to get pregnant, they
Yes.
wait, they count 14 days after they menstruate,
Yes.
and then that'd be like a great time, you're ovulating.
That's
And
the
then
concept.
wait 2 weeks if you miss your period, then possibly you're pregnant.
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone's different though.
Yes, so it varies. But if you do a little bit of math and do a little bit of science, you can pinpoint within 12 hours when you ovulate. The idea of the calendar was you do your menstrual cycle, you actually do backwards. If you know when you menstruate, you go halfway, 2 weeks back, and that's when you ovulate. If you're regular enough, you can sort of predict forward and try to guess about 2 weeks out.
But not everybody goes that way.
And not everyone's the same. The average is 14, it can be 17. It can be 14.
There's just like 1 or 2 days.
Yes! Eggs only live for 24 hours. So
It's
they're
literally
egg-
24 hours.
24 hours. The problem is sperm live for 2 days. So if you do 2 days before, 2 days after ovulation, it's a 5-day window of fertility. So in theory, you can only get pregnant 5 days out of the month. Although you tell your teenager anytime, all the time, which is what I'm telling my daughters. Look at a boy, you get pregnant. I'm going to tell them a bald-faced lie. But the reality is, you can only conceive when there's sperm in the egg. The egg only lives for about a day. So you have a 24-hour window to conceive. Most people, roughly average.
So when you take like an abortion pill,
Yes.
is that like
The day after pill.
no, not the after, like you get pregnant and you're like, I don't want that.
Yep.
So does that just kill the progesterone?
Yep. There's no progesterone, you menstruate.
Oh, it just flushes it out.
Yeah.
The day after the same thing.
Slightly different. That's doing somewhat like that, but not. It actually affects partly that side. Let me walk you through, speaking of pills, let's do the same graph. We're going to do with the pill. Any day now.
Should we know this one?
Well, let's start. Somebody's going next. Alright, so let's read this little line. Not that I'm saying everyone get birth control pills, because not. But here's the biology. Right? So the pill uses negative feedback to prevent ovulation and implantation. So what the pill or most hormonal contraceptives are doing is trying to put you basically in the luteal phase. So long as my body thinks I've already released the egg, it's going to stop me from making more eggs. If there's no egg, and sperm doesn't matter because you need an egg plus a sperm. Okay, so if you read through this blah, 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 I love this line. Suppresses production of FSH in the pituitary gland. So what you're trying to do is turn the pituitary gland off by turning off the brain. So you're trying to stay luteal phase and turn off the follicular phase. That's why you look at the graphs, okay? Let's look at the graphs here. What do you find LH and FSH? They stay low because my brain thinks I have a baby. I'm not going to tell my pituitary to order another one up. Right? So as long as one of the hormones of my uterus are staying high, like for example progesterone, the brain thinks you're going to have an egg, so it steps down, they call it, and won't release a new egg. So the LH and FSH never go anywhere.
Aren't there estrogen in the pills as well?
What?
Aren't there estrogen? Isn't there estrogen in the pills as well?
Yes, the old pills are pure estrogen. The newer ones are more progestins, but you can do either one. Your brain says it's the same. So either estrogen or progesterone will tell the brain you've already ovulated. Estrogen climbs right
Oh, I
up.
see. So, okay.
Right. So I'm suppressing the brain
So it's either keeping the estrogen high
or
or.
the progesterone.
Okay.
Right. sense? Yes.
So if your brain thinks you're pregnant, why don't you have like any other pregnancies?
You
Is it
can.
because of the baby? Or
Yeah, so women on the pill report bloating, sore boobs, mood changes because your brain is thinking, oh, you're pregnant, so I'm going to do all the other stuff, testosterone and blah, blah. So there are common symptoms, not always, dozen levels. Right? And then you remember your sugar pills at the end. So right here, right? So if you take sugar pills, then the levels drop. The uterus quits getting progesterone, so I start to bleed, right? But then immediately I take the pill again, and then I go back to being pregnant a week later. So you don't give the brain time enough to make a new egg because you immediately go from not pregnant to pregnant in 3 days. And so you don't have time to grow a new egg because that takes about 2 weeks. Right? But if you start missing your pills, guess what the brain can do? It can start ordering up eggs fast enough that it outraces your pills. So that's the concept. By the way, they went over they tell you to take birth control pills the first Sunday following the what? Okay, so if you read through that, if I take them after I menstruate, my uterus is always thin because I haven't had time to grow it. That's why you bleed less on the pill because you never grow the uterus thick enough over the 2-week period because you only have a couple days. So that reduces the size of the uterus that you're maintaining. Yeah.
So that's like I never understood the point of taking it at the same time every day.
Just to remind you to do it like brushing your teeth.
Oh, but not with all of them though. Like the mini pill, you don't take it at the same time every day. It doesn't stop working.
Right, because the dosage is different. The only reason it takes the same time is the guarantee you take it. There's nothing biologically relevant about the time.
it's like the
They say it increases placebo pill. There's no reason to take the sugar pill.
Right.
But they say it increases effectiveness if you don't take it the same exact time every day.
No.
That's what
Really?
I mean, that's what I tell them.
Well,
About
that's
an hour. Wasn't it about maintaining that hormone?
right, so the trick is, the time of days are relevant, right? What happens is, if that drops fast enough, soon enough, the brain starts picking up that you're not actually pregnant, so it starts ordering up an egg. So the idea of taking it at the same time is to keep the level always high. So if you wait, the level begins to drop, and then your brain may think other. But there's no magic about what time you take the pill. It's irrelevant what time you take it, as long as you keep taking it.
The same time.
Same time as to maintain the same level, but there's nothing magic about like why you take it when, as long as you take it.
So those follicles over on the other side are in a suspended state.
Yep, they
So
sit there.
there's one that is almost ready to go. So
Yep.
then if you miss your pills, that
Then
one's
2
ready
weeks
to
later,
go.
that one fires and you're not ready. You just pick up the up.
So can birth control then make your menopause go later? 'Cause you have
No,
all
there's
the
been no
egg back
link
up?
to contraceptives and menopause that anyone's found. That was a hypothesis, is that birth control pills would change menopause dates. There's nothing that says it does. And in theory, you think it might, but it doesn't.
Yeah, because if you're causing a blockage of all that stuff.
Right. And it just doesn't affect it directly. Of course, we haven't had that long of time to study long term. Because then also your diet affects menopause and genetics, so you get all these other fuzz in the system. Yeah.
Why does it reduce your cancer risk if that's relevant?
Well, it reduces which one? Breast cancer goes up.
It reduces the risk of ovarian cancer.
Right, but because the ovaries aren't mitotic.
Because they're just not working.
Right. So if you reduce mitosis, you in theory reduce cancer rate, although it raises your breast cancer rate. Estrogen does that. Breast cells are estrogen sensitive, so they tend to grow more with more estrogen. If you take high estrogen, they grow more, which leads to cancer.
So what the pills are progesterone based now?
Yes.
More progesterone?
More progesterone.
Yeah.
Let me show you. One more time. Are you getting mad at me?
I know that they have different ones.
I was just really good.
Let me show you another animation before you get mad. Wait just a second.
I think it's probably more estrogen than progesterone. There's a few different estrogen.
And they might be given because of different ages. I forgot.
Yeah, because it depends on your age. Because also females often just more.
Right. And I think estrogen
At
is more
sexual maturity, in a woman's ovaries contain about 200,000 immature eggs called primary oocytes. A primary oocyte is diploid and is arrested in prophase 1 of meiosis. A layer of follicle cells surrounds each primary oocyte. Together, an oocyte and its follicle cells make up a follicle.
I disagree a little bit with that reason. You get the gist. So there's the egg, which is the distinct thing from the other stuff, which is the follicle. Okay? Right? So yeah, fourth or fifth year, you're born with a bunch of eggs, and there'll be more eggs in your ovaries than you'll ever have ovulated in your life. Right? But here's my egg.
An ovarian cycle lasts about 28 days, beginning at the first day of menstruation or menses.
Menstruation.
Yeah, so again, I learned it at the end. You can put the beginning, I don't care where you put menstruation, you can put it in the middle. You just, as long as you understand where it falls in the scheme of things. Right? To my head, it sounds better at the end. That's me. Right? So people number things differently depending on how you do it, and they're going to ask you to number, as long as you understand where it would occur on a graph or something. Right? So.
During the first 7 days of the cycle, 6 to 12 primary oocytes begin to mature. As the follicles develop, the follicle cells communicate with oocytes and pass them nutrients through pores called gap junctions. Each oocyte grows larger, and the surrounding follicle cells divide, proliferating to produce thousands of follicle cells in a single follicle.
So remember, my follicular phase, my follicle and egg are both growing. They're both maturing or hypertrophying, however you want to phrase it. So here's I'm growing an egg.
By day 7, all but one of the developing follicles begins to degenerate. The remaining follicle continues to develop, and its follicle cells continue to pump it with nourishment, and also supply it with proteins and informational molecules needed for early stages of development.
So you have all these follicles racing to finish, and then one gets to continue on, the other's just basically stop the degenerating. So even though you have all these eggs, you do lose some that don't win the race.
Well, which one wins? How do they?
It's totally random.
Oh.
And that's why meiosis works so well. As long as it's biotic, you don't know which one will actually get to be the egg. So all those cells are random in Vegas. You just one of them will win. Maybe. Go.
The maturing primary oocyte completes meiosis 1 and divides into 2 haploid cells. Each of these cells receives half the chromosomes. However, one cell, called a polar body, receives very little cytoplasm. The other, now a secondary oocyte, enters meiosis 2 and rests there until fertilization. At day 14, ovulation occurs, and the secondary oocyte erupts from the ovary. The oviduct contains microscopic cilia that feed and draw in the released oocytes. This immature egg enters an oviduct, where it may become fertilized by a sperm cell and complete meiosis. The follicle cells that are left behind develop into a small mass of endocrine tissue called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum remains in the ovary for 2 weeks, secreting the hormones estrogen and progesterone. At the end of the ovarian cycle, if the woman is not pregnant, the corpus luteum disintegrates. Each month, the ovarian cycle is tightly coordinated with the uterine cycle. In the uterine cycle, the lining of the uterus builds up and then sloughs off. The cycle begins with the sloughing of the uterine lining. This is the first day of menses, also called menstruation. After menstruation, the uterine lining starts to grow again and to prepare for implantation of an embryo. During this phase of the uterine cycle, up until ovulation, the uterine lining proliferates. Capillary beds supply this tissue with nutrients.
What's proliferate mean in English? Grow, get bigger, right? So the concept is becoming the uterus thicker for baby, right? More proliferation.
Just before menstruation occurs again, the capillary beds degenerate and no longer deliver the surrounding tissue with nutrients. During menstruation, this tissue dies and sloughs off through the vagina to the outside of the body.
So now we're going to zoom in a little bit more on that. Oh, that went too far. Okay, it's back. Another one. This one here. Just one more time.
The ovarian cycle is controlled by the interplay of hormones from the pituitary gland and from the ovary itself. A few days before the beginning of the cycle, the anterior pituitary begins to increase its secretion of 2 hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH. FSH and LH stimulate ovarian follicles to grow. As the follicles grow, they begin to secrete estrogen. During this phase of the cycle, the increasing levels of estrogen feed back on the pituitary to inhibit the release of additional FSH and LH. During the next week, the levels of FSH and LH drop. Beginning around day 12, the increasing levels of estrogen suddenly have the opposite effect on the pituitary gland. Instead of exerting a negative feedback on the pituitary, these hormones now exert a positive feedback, stimulating the pituitary to release FSH and large amounts of LH. LH reaches a peak at day 14 of the ovarian cycle. This LH surge triggers the mature follicle to rupture and release the egg, the process of ovulation. LH then triggers the remaining follicle cells to differentiate into the corpus luteum, which secretes estrogen and progesterone. The corpus luteum remains in the ovary, secreting estrogen and progesterone for the last 2 weeks of the cycle. At this point in the cycle, these hormones again inhibit the release of FSH and LH. A decline in FSH and LH restricts follicles from beginning to develop during the second half of the cycle. LH, or a hormone produced by an implanted embryo, is required to maintain the life of the corpus luteum. At the end of the cycle, if an embryo is not implanted, the corpus luteum degenerates. When the corpus luteum degenerates, it no longer releases estrogen and progesterone.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So if somebody was pregnant, then the corpus luteum wouldn't turn into corpus albicans until
Correct.
after?
Correct. It stays in luteum for many weeks into pregnancy. So that's why you don't menstruate normally. Makes sense?
Is link on your website?
No. I don't think it may be. I don't know.
How come some women
I don't remember this one is.
How come you can have periods during pregnancy?
You can, but not the rule. And usually what that is called breakthrough bleeding. It's not menstrual bleeding per se.
It seems like
It looks like it, but it's just not. It's your uterine bleeding, but not menstrual related.
So why do you have menstrual cramps during menstruation?
How would your uterus get that stuff out? Because you can't. So what it does is the muscles contract and basically squeeze off the capillaries and pinch them off and shove them out into the lumen of the uterus. Same way you get the baby out is if you contract, the baby doesn't, so the baby ends up getting sloughed off your uterus. So the cramping is an essential part to get the capillaries closed and also to pinch them off and send them on their way. And so that's how the uterus does it, just squeeze enough and the capillaries go off with them.
Does having a really heavy period have anything to do with fertility? Like if you naturally have a really light period, does that mean you're not as prepared for a baby?
I've never seen one have data with that one, although there's a genetic component to the size of menstrual periods and the timing. I've never seen anyone say about fertility per se, but I haven't looked, so.
Whenever people get IUDs and they say that the one with the hormones makes you stop having a period, but I mean the other one without hormones makes you have a really extreme heavy period.
Probably.
Why is that?
Because there's a foreign thing in your body.
Right, so part of the way IUD works traditionally is it pushes on the uterus and makes it think there's a scar. And so some people, so it won't affect your menstrual cycle at all because the timing would still be there, your brain would still do that. So the pushing on your uterus wall then would change how the uterine cells metabolize. So.
And that's why you would have.
And possibly you could have a difference in your menstrual flow. You still have it because you haven't changed the brain any. So the same hormones are kicking in. Make sense?
Yep.
Alright. So, if you understood that, find your case study number 2 on page 30. Yeah. Alright, so I'm going to let you do this with your teams by yourselves for 5 minutes. Your job is to read this case. Try to figure it out 1 through 6. And we'll talk about it about 5 minutes. If you understand your menstrual cycle in a little bit, you can figure this out. You can talk together, that's okay.
What does ectopic mean?
Outside the tube.
Okay. So ectopic endometrial tissue.
Being really honest, literally means on the wrong place.
Okay.
Because an ectopic pregnancy is not in the uterus,
Right.
it's in the tube.
So topic is like you're on top of it, so ectopic is you're outside of the place.
Okay.
Outside is just supposed to be. You're reading the wrong story. That's ectopic.
Wait, I've heard that.
Easy. Your friend?
Yeah, I like that.
I'll put him on it.
We like being,
Oh,
we like being in the dark.
Put him in the dark. Everything I'm taking in the next test, there you go. Goes in the dark.
But it also said it was, I don't know how to know.
You see my fingers for about 3 seconds.
In your head. EKG, yeah, do it. Yeah, that's what I know. So what I'm doing. Oh, like how you, that's what there's you're releasing pheromone in your arm, binds to your nose, and then successfully, and your exhale begins to change the hormones.
Yeah. So it's an interesting.
What's the other one?
Makes sense.
A lot of social mammals, females mate together. Amazing it because the mom's reproducing. I have a baby, you have a baby at the same time. We can take care of each other's babies. If you're all by yourself, then so lions, for example, all work at once. One lion is staying with his cubs. Everyone else is your lion is together. So one lion is social females coordinating. So we're all having babies together, we're all nursing together, doing diaper and all. And you can do fun without it. Yeah. We do. So the University of Chicago found a receptor in your nose, pheromone current. So in theory, during the summer you cycle quicker together because your brain shrinks that let more pheromone out. So it's easier to cycle together. But the one effect happens in months of being in the womb. And that was interesting. Who you become is very ungood. There's one woman that everyone else like tunes to.
She's the alpha.
So what happens? Why does your brain take first cycle?
She's the strongest in our
So your brain starts to cycle together. So what happens? The brain starts going out with a hurry. So you begin to order the your brain will slow down. It'll wait longer to stop the process. The brain will surge quicker. It moves faster.
How does the brain
It smells perfect. Directly tunes the smell, and directly tunes the lubricant. So your smell immediately comes and your balance immediately gets to smell faster. The human industry knows that. Smell perfumes will make it. So your balance tunes in the smell very quickly. Because all animals use smell as a primary young, mate. So we kind of inherited that, but we don't consciously think of it. We do that. Just your brain's very good at picking smells like man. Food smells all. Man, you smell nasty in that too. You can't really smell. Your brain can't.
Well, that was an interesting totally opposite.
That's right.
Men, yeah.
But now we are. We are like the same thing.
Yeah.
You want the bad guy when you're not. Right? You want the stable. You want the account for the husband when you're having a baby. You want the biker dudes.
Yep.
All right, let's go through our study. So what's wrong with her? Endometriosis. So let's see that word. Endometri means what again? Endometrium, the lining of your uterus. So endometriosis literally means the lining of your uterus is doing something wrong, right? So endometriosis. So what's wrong with it? I mean, well, how do you know it's endometriosis? What told you in that case that something wrong with your endometrium? And let's see. Well, we got the cramping, but I think you can cramp all day long. The key idea here is presence of endometrial tissue where? That's ovaries. Endometrium's in your uterus. That's not a uterus, right? So part of my uterus is now on my ovary. That's definitely not a normal chain of events, right? Endometrium should be in my uterus.
But the uterine wall, that's in
That implies the outside wall, but it doesn't.
It's hard to say.
It's hard to say.
I mean, understand.
Yeah. So what does this word ectopic mean, medical terminology books? Not where it's supposed to be. So not normal place. So ectopic pregnancy means you're pregnant not in your uterus. Ectopic endometrial tissue means you have endometrium not where it's supposed to be. So it's in the wrong location. Right? So here's the question. How did it get there? What? By accident. That works. Can you give me a little biology of why it can get outside your uterus? Let's go back to the girl plumbing real fast. You mentioned the animation. How did the egg get in? The oviduct. How did it get in there? There's big holes, right? So that implies there's no connection between the ovary and the fallopian tube. They just wrap around. So what happened if your endometrial tissue went out this hole? Where would it end up? On your ovary and the outside of your uterus. So that hole that lets the egg in could let your endometrium out. Right? It could, quote, spill out of the uterus and go backwards, called retrograde, back out the fallopian tube. Because there's nothing really at the end of your fallopian tube except air.
Wait, why would it go backwards?
That's a good question. No one knows.
So it just might all of a sudden start.
One hypothesis is called the menstrual retrograde hypothesis, which says that if you can't get the blood out fast enough from menstruation, it backs up and basically spills back this way. There's what they call the retroperistalsis hypothesis, which says a fallopian tube does a cramp and pushes something the wrong way. So it's cramping that. There is the genetic hypothesis, you know, hopes to be you, you're just born that way. There's the there's another one which says, I forget the title of it, basically all your other body cells have the same genes as your uterus, because we're all the same DNA, and they think one day I should be a uterus, so they grow endometrial tissue when they're not a uterus. Reproductive went well, right? All your cells have the same DNA, so every cell in your body wants to be a uterus. It could. So, and we don't know which one it is, right? So we go back to our question, which is here. How can it get out? Out the fallopian tube. So it could go backwards out the fallopian tubby? No, what? Tube. I can't write anything. Fallopian, what? Tube. So it could go out your fallopian tube, out the fimbriae, and end up in your abdominal cavity. But again, we don't know for sure if that's the only reason. Right? But the important one for today is number 5. Because we're thinking about the menstrual cycle you just learned. Why would you go gonadotropin inhibitor helper? So what does work? Which one of your gonadotropins again? FSH and LH. So I inhibit them. I'm going to stop doing what? I'm going to stop doing this side, right? I'm going to stop my follicular phase. So I'm going to stop growing eggs. I'm going to stop growing follicles and stop making estrogen, which grows my uterus. So I'm going to turn this side of the board off if I inhibit my FSH and LH. I won't get the message to make eggs and uterus. So if your problem is you're growing too much endometrium, you sure don't want to do this side of the board because you're going to grow more endometrium because the estrogen level will tell you that. Make sense? So you're trying to inhibit the follicular phase. So if I inhibit these, I won't get the message to be in follicular phase. Make sense? That's the concept. So stops the follicular phase. Or you can say, see the left-hand side of the board. No. So how does that stop ovulations? Remind me how stopping LH and FSH would stop you from ovulating. That's not over here.
There's no spike.
There's no spike. So if I can't increase these, I can't spike them. So it takes FSH and LH and estrogen. They have to spike to ovulate. If there's no growing, there's no spiking. Like in basketball. Make sense? So if I don't increase those hormones, I can never spike my ovaries to these eggs. So let's do an oral contraceptive. Would that also work to inhibit the follicular phase?
No. Because it keeps you in the luteal phase, right?
Yes. Would stay in this phase, help me avoid that phase?
Yeah.
Yes, it would, because if I am turning this side off, I'm going to reduce those, thereby not causing this. But there's a problem. What would happen if I'm taking estrogen as my oral contraceptive? What does estrogen do? It would cause my uterine to grow. So it would sort of work, kind of, but not always. So it would stop my follicular phase, but it could cause me to still grow my endometrium that's already there. Does that make sense? So it could work. It would stop the follicular phase.
Could it, what if you just, like if you specifically took a progesterone?
Yes, so the idea was you'd have to take only a progesterone pill or something that would not affect the estrogen. Right? But the logic would work, is it would turn off this side. I wouldn't ovulate, I wouldn't grow. And I could end up with my endometrium growing. So So I would say, if it were me, that I would want to make sure my contraceptive was a progesterone-based one. So I'm not affecting new endometrium. Does that make sense?
What is that?
With what?
Low Y, sorry.
With increased progesterone.
Oh.
Make sense? So again, if I can turn off that. Speaking of contraceptives, PCC says, thou shalt know contraceptives, thou shalt. So scroll ahead to page 35. We're going to do this kind of quickly as a class. I lied. I make all this up every day. It's my animations right. Alright. So you are required to understand how these basically work. Right? So you understand. Alright. Let's go through each one. Remind me how abstinence works. Wow, if you don't have sex, you don't make a baby. Only everyone understood that concept in this society, right? That if there's no sex, there's no baby. Hey, end of problem. Let's do spermicides. What are you doing in spermicides? Yeah, I kill the sperm before they reach the egg. There's no sperm, no egg, no baby unless sperm plus egg. Right? So condoms and or diaphragms or cervical caps, or pick a variety of ones you want. What's the concept there? Collective. So again, sperm can't get to egg. I'm stopping them from getting out the barrier. Poor little sperm are caught in the dead end. Now you're able to figure out D quite well. How do oral contraceptives work? They maintain the luteal phase and keep you from what? What won't you do if you're in luteal phase?
Make a new egg.
You will not ovulate. They're designed to stop ovulation. So if I'm here, I don't need new eggs. So Depo does that, which is the same. Norplant, birth control pills, the patch, the shot. They're all variations of that concept. So D and E are the same thing. You're stopping a follicular phase from occurring. Pull and pray. What's the concept behind that winner? Right? Pull out before you ejaculate so sperm are not eating the egg. Right? It can be. Well, it's like the effect.
You do it correctly.
Right. Ever see people say, well, abstinence is like 50% effect? Yeah, because you do or you do not have sex, right? That's the same thing here. Either you pulled and prayed or you didn't, right? So it's either 100% or 0, which averages is 50. Right? That's how they get those numbers.
You might have forgotten to pray.
You forgot to pray, right? You gotta pray with the pool, right?
So Depo for bear is the same as just for.
Right, so all your hormonal ones, the Depo, there's variations on the same concept, that you're stopping follicular phases from starting up. Right? There's different mechanisms, but they're all basically the same thing. Let's do NFP. How does that work?
Is that like keeping track of your cycle?
Keeping track of your cycle. You're trying to figure out when you ovulate or when you don't ovulate, depending if you want a baby or don't. So you're trying to time when this occurs. When there's an egg. Because if there's no egg, there's no baby. So if you know when there's an egg, you can avoid or not avoid, depending on how you want to do it. So IUD without a hormone. So the hormonal one would be the same as D, but without a hormone.
Makes the uterus inhospitable.
That's the answer. Makes the uterus inhospitable for the baby. You can't implant. So that's the moral question. You still ovulated and conceive, but you don't implant. But that's after. That has nothing to do with this cycle at all. A little bit. One thing just keeps your uterus from accepting an implantation. The uterus has to actually receive the egg. This weird biochemical handshake. So the uterus basically thinks you already have a baby, so I'm not going to let another one in. How about tubal ligation and those things? That's your tube size. So again, sperm can't get out, egg can't get out, or in, depending on how you want to argue it. Therefore, they can't meet. Make sense?
Sir.
Okay, so let's do this one here on this side. You should. It should be basic knowledge for most people by now. So let's forget, this is not a problem with MAU, right, children? No STDs, but what contraceptive would be best if that's a problem for your moral landscape? Condoms or abstinence would probably like STDs. Anyway, you don't care that. So the idea is the barrier, keep the sperm and egg apart. Keep the fluids away. I'm more interested in number 2. What you learned today. Are there contraceptives that are agonists? Remind me what agonists meant. Work the same as. Are there any that work the same as a hormone in your body?
Contraceptive.
Yeah, all the oral contraceptives work by basically mimicking progesterone. Okay? I'm trying to tell my body I'm pregnant, and therefore my body will not release an egg. So I'm doing the same thing as the luteal phase. So I'm agonizing the phase. Right? Make sense?
Where's the oral and contraceptive?
Yeah, every hormonal contraceptive works basically the same.
What about?
Okay, antagonists, none of the over-the-counter ones do that, but your pharmacists and doctors have access to some that block. For example, there are some that block these. The danazol that you read about blocks these, so they're an antagonistic hormone. They block these ones. But the ones over the counter are not blockers, they work the same as.
So those are oral contraceptives.
They work as a contraceptive, but you can't buy them as such. Right? But so there are no contraceptives that you buy that are antagonistic. They're all the same as. So for the answer to this one, no, you can't buy these. You buy these.
So they're not used as contraceptives,
Correct.
but they have that effect.
They have that effect, like danazol. So let's see, are there any contraceptives that act on the gonads? What were the gonads again? Ovaries and testes. Are there any that act on your ovaries and testes directly? Say no. No. So none of the contraceptives you buy turn on or off your ovaries or testes. They do it indirectly by turning on and off what organs? Pituitary and the hypothalamus. So the oral contraceptives affect your pituitary and hypothalamus to tell your brain not to order the eggs. So you're fooling your brain to tell your ovaries what to do. So again, the answer is basically these two paragraphs. If I can get this to turn off, then I don't have eggs. So all your hormonal contraceptives work on that level. All right, let's do number 4 for some laughs. How do you know you're ovulating? You probably don't, right? Yes, we know. So what are some signs? Cervical fluid change, your cervix open. Your body temperature goes up. You have a pain in your side with the ovary, middle smirts they call it, with the ovary ejected egg. Middle smirts. Fancy word. That's actually germ middle pain. They call it middle smirts. That's pain. So you may have a pain in your side. Your cervix will change. Your temperature goes up. Right? There's some other ones which are harder to see. If you're a baboon, your butt would turn red, right? If you're not a baboon, right? They do. You can see a lot of baboons for miles. Okay, so the question then is B. If you want to prove hormonally that you are ovulating, what would you look for on this? LH and FSH would be spiking, and what would estrogen be doing? Going up. So if you go to the pharmacy and spend $50 on those hormonal kits for ovulation, that's what they're going to test for. Is if your estrogen is going up, and your LH and FSH are beginning to climb or spike, you are going to ovulate the next day or two. That's what they're checking on the graph. So that's what they're looking for to see that hormonal ovulations occur. So we go back to the picture of Doom here, which is right here. So you're looking for, these are going up, and this one's climbing as well. Those three together means ovulation is imminent, soon. Make sense?
Yep.
So follicular phase. Very good. All right. So remind me again what ovulation time is the only thing I'm going to care about.
Does it stimulate July for one day?
Yeah, that's right. So the egg has to be there for a sperm to make a baby. If there's no egg, I don't care. So before ovulation, after ovulation. Let's do number 5, which they did in Europe, but it never caught on. Is this one, a hormonal pill for men. And they want to decrease sperm count and not affect his sexiness. How would you do that?
Inhibit.
Inhibin would work, right? Inhibin would turn off my brain. Or I could block FSH. That would turn off my sperm without affecting my testosterone. So either one of those would work. I could turn off FSH, no fish. Or I could increase inhibin, which does the same thing. It turns off FSH.
What did you say for C? Sorry.
No A equals no A. Makes sense? So here's what the general idea is how these contraceptives work or don't. So speaking of tests, let's go over your exam.